Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I mean, really happy to be here because I've been taken out by a flu bug after the last few days. So today I'm feeling quite a bit better, and I'd like to call the meeting to order if we could. And the meeting to order, I think we would first need to find out the roll call and find out if we have a quorum on the call at this point in time. So, Ashley, if you'd call the roll, I'd appreciate it.
I will. Mariah Bry.
Here.
Andy Buttles.
Here.
Janet Clark.
Here.
Tom Crosby.
Here.
Dave Daniels.
Here.
Patty Edelberg. Don Hum.
Here.
Ryan Klusendorf.
Here.
Shelley Meyer.
Here.
Dan Pearson. Amy Penterman.
Here.
Brody Staple.
Here.
Charles Untz. Darren Van Ruden.
Here.
Steve Bickel. Dave Buholzer.
Here.
Rob Byrne.
Here.
Ted Galloway. Paul Scharfman.
Here.
Jerry Schrader. Jeff Schwager. David Ward. Elizabeth Wells. John Akula.
Here.
Dennis Bongart.
Present.
Mike DeLong.
Here.
Brad Guzzi.
Here.
Melissa Haig.
Here.
Renee Johnson. John Schmidt. Chad Vincent.
Here.
Senator Olson. Senator Ringhand. Representative Plummer. Representative Verwink. Governor's Office Representative Noah Roberts. President Ray Cross. President Lori Wires. Secretary Paff. That completes the roll. We do have a quorum in the room. We also have Krista Knigge, one of our resource persons, and Grace Kulas, one of our communications director here at DATCAP. Is anyone else on the line whose name that I did not call?
Yeah, sure.
Brooke Session with the Country Today.
Thank you, Brooke, from the Country Today.
Jerry
Group with AgriView.
Great, Lynn from AgriView, and Jerry Schrader, I heard you.
All right, thanks.
Patty Edelberg as well.
Great, and Patty. That completes the
Jeff
roll.
Moran from UW System.
Great, thank you, Jeff, from UW System.
John Lucy,
Jen Walsh from Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin.
Beth Wells from Organic Valley.
Great, Beth. All right, that completes the roll. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, good. We do have a quorum and actually very full representation, so I appreciate that. I would like to know if we have anybody that Ashley has requested a public appearance for this call, have notified us.
Nobody has requested a public appearance to speak.
Okay. In which case, we will discuss the voting that was done. There was a survey sent out on all of the 51 recommendations. Pardon?
We do need to approve the minutes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that reminder. All of us, I presume, have taken a quick look at the minutes at least, and I would just ask if there are any corrections to the minutes, and we would need somebody to move approval of the minutes in a second for that.
This is Brad. I move approval.
Okay,
Cody Staple for second.
we have a move in second. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
One opposed? Were there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, then we'll accept the minutes. And let's get down to our ranking of the priorities of the task force. We had 51 proposals, 2 that had been passed earlier in the year in December, and the 49 that were passed at our meeting in Sheboygan. Those were all circulated in a voting ballot, and we had 10 votes to cast each, up to 3 for any particular proposal, and any combination of 0 to 3 votes until your 10 dots were fully spent could have been done. And we had 30 people that did vote on the proposals. You've been circulated, I believe, the rankings, and I will just run down a couple of these, at least the top few in here. The number 1 ranking was the investment in the Dairy Hub, Innovation Hub. That received a total of 24 dots. And just to break that down, there were 3 people who voted all 3 of their dots, so people feeling fairly passionate about that particular one. 4 people voted 2 dots, and 7 people voted a single dot on that. There were 16 of the voting members who didn't put any dot priority on that particular notice, but that one had by far the most dots in total. The second most was the Cheese Brand and Export Board. And if any of you need reminders about that, let me know, but otherwise you can take a look and see what they were. But this was one where Wisconsin would take some form, as was indicated, might be similar to what Kerrygold has done in Ireland, to create a Wisconsin brand for cheese and for export purposes, for recognition in our export efforts. That received a second place vote with 18 total dots. This had no people voting all 3 dots, but 5 people voting 2 of their dots, 8 people voting a single dot, and 17 people with no dot votes. CDR staffing and analysis for full-time positions was a recognition that CDR has obtained funding and support, both private and state, for the facility on campus, but that there was no additional state funds for full-time positions within the expanded CDR, and that was raised as the number 3 concern. So we had 16 total dots there. Just to break down a little bit more rapidly, the importance of exports, recognizing the importance of exports to Wisconsin dairy, was the 4th most ranked one, becoming one of the dairy product and business innovation centers as enabled in the recent Farm Bill passage. Senator Baldwin's amendment to the passage of that was also a tie at 4th place. Another tie at 4th place was to reduce the number of milk classes from the current 4 to 2 in the federal milk marketing order system. And then another tier that would break into a voting relevance was regulatory changes needed for FDA product standards of identity, which could include inclusion of ultra-filtered milk products or other milk-derived ingredients, truth in food labeling, and requiring animal official identification for any animals leaving the farm, whether that was for slaughter purposes or for fair purposes or some other reason that an animal would exit the farm. And the final one in that tier was to create a cheese export program at CDR with technical staff support. I will let each of you look down the rest of those, unless you have comments about those that you'd like to discuss, but you know, these were all passed, so I guess that I certainly want to say that these are all recommendations of the task force. But if we think about maybe where the highest priorities are, and where we want to assure that we expend considerable energy and efforts toward getting these done. I think that this gives us an indication of the task force and across a lot of members. Are there any questions or comments about this that you would like to, anybody would like to make?
This is Dave Bullholzer. Quite a few of these recommendations that received a lot of votes are kind of crossovers. Export is mentioned more than once. CDR is mentioned more than once. Some of it in context with export. Some of these programs are at least partially in place, and I guess we need to probably discuss how we can maybe by doing some combining on them, give them a little more clout to help moving forward.
Good comment, Dave. And you are correct that we had a number of recommendations that were brought forward, in many cases from different committees, but that had some similar or crossover content. And they might well be, at least as far as an idea goes, combined and perhaps strengthened into fewer. Does anybody else have comment or discussion about that?
Mark, this is Brody. I have a question. So I guess, I don't know if we as a task force discussed this before, but if we pick the top 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 priorities that we really get behind, as you're suggesting, what happens to the other 40 that we invested time and energy into as well?
Oh, Brody, as I tried to mention there, maybe you didn't catch it, but all of these were passed as recommendations by the task force. So to my way of thinking, that doesn't lessen the need for any of these. We did have a couple that didn't get passed by the task force, so these are all recommendations that the majority of the committee supported. All this was trying to do was to see whether or not there could be a priority amongst these rankings that would let us wonder if we could be sure that we put additional effort into some of these. Again, we've talked about this in the past. This wasn't part of this ranking, but there's some of these that really should be implemented at an individual business level, and some of them that should be instituted at a level like Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, or some other kind of higher level, some at the state legislative level and some at the national level. So just the fact that we've got a priority doesn't, I think, excuse people from, either not worrying about doing some of these things, or in fact, putting a great deal more effort into others. I just think it gives people an idea about the ones that the industry felt was, maybe of real concern to them. Comments or questions?
Mark, this is Paul Sharfman of the Specialty Cheese Company.
Yeah.
I feel like we want to make a better, more short-winded ask. It feels like there's 2 asks and a bunch of other stuff. One ask is to the state legislature, and the second is to the feds. And it could be that the ask to the feds is to different regulatory groups. But I have some energy around trying to distill what I frankly think of as wisdom. There are a lot of really bright, energized people in this group. And I'd love to be able to take the stuff we think the state legislature should do and in short sentences tell them what it is. There's how to distill this stuff. And I'd be glad glad to participate with the direction that this poll has given us.
Well, I think that that's, not only laudable on your part, Paul, but absolutely something that we need to do. We haven't kind of talked about next steps yet, but this is an obvious next step. Once we've sort of distilled and pulled this stuff down, and to me, this still all has to get put together in a very readable document. Now, in my personal belief, I think that we ought to put word for word the recommendations that we voted on and were passed in that document, but that doesn't have to be the way they're presented first and foremost. They might be in the appendix that way so people can see that. But, I think that you would like to put your best foot forward. There were some very much recurring themes through this committee. One of them, to my way of thinking, was specialty cheese still has a strong and perhaps growing role to play. And the marketing channel for that was particularly emphasized with exports by this group. Not that you ignore the domestic market, but that seemed to be the one place where a lot of different committees, subcommittees, really felt that we could make some difference. So that to me is a theme, and it's expressed in several of these, as Dave pointed out, recommendations.
I think there's a theme around increasing demand for dairy product for the state. Export is one. A couple of other specialty cheese comes through. I think there's a theme around capital and the barriers to capital, what we can do around it. And we can continue. It does feel like there's 3, 4, maybe 5, but not more than that, asks that we have for Wisconsin legislature. You want to help? Here's what you got to do. You're going to take some money in the following ways. And I'd love to get a small subgroup to do the distilling and come back to the team and say, we distilled it the following way. Can we get an up or down vote? This is what we want to say. Send to the state legislature.
Some other discussion around Paul's idea?
I think that, this is Brody again. I think that there's, we all belong to various ag groups, trade groups, organizations, co-ops. And I think that through a lot of those organizations, we all have an interest in a certain number of these recommendations moving forward as well. And I think that there's a lot of work already pushing some of these down in Madison. And we'll continue through our own various avenues, which I think, and I'm backing you up here, Paul, but I think that if, as a subcommittee, we get together as a subgroup and make a few recommendations and structure these in a way that's presentable to the state legislature, and then we come through in our various groups and co-ops and trade groups and kind of back cleanup and really hammer it home down in Madison on a more personal level.
That would be awesome. Dave and I can take responsibility for getting the Cheesemakers Association. You can take one, and Chad. I guess Chad can't lobby, but right. Get a consensus. Get the industry groups to say we're all in support of it, and let the legislatures look at me and Dave going, wait, you're in support of something that helps the dairy farmers? I thought you were cheesemakers. Yeah, guys, actually, we're all on the same team. That's why it's one set of recommendations. Love it.
This is Dennis. Just to put input in, I think as, watching the interactivity of the subcommittees and that too, and kind of, a little how the process was steered, I agree with Paul. I think there's some direct asks, but I think there were some that also may have had an ask in them, and we probably broadened them away from, some sort of a physical, this is what we really want type of thing. So there might just need to be a little bit of review as far as what the actual intention was on a few of them. So.
And likewise, I think that, some of these recommendations that fell further down the list, right? I think it's a great, if we go in there personally, I'm thinking some of the ones down the list. If we go in there personally and say, well, this was a recommendation by the task force, maybe not on the top of the list, but nevertheless, it was passed as a recommendation. I think that is definitely going to hold some clout as well, just being on the list.
Yep.
Well, the whole process here was to, first of all, begin to identify issues and, then to distill those up through those subcommittees and finally vote on them, So we've had a lot of methods of trying to have, our strongest and best ideas only be presented here. So in some ways, it's like asking which is my favorite child, right?
Good luck with that.
Well, one thing that we obviously have to do, we have to have a final written product at some point in time, a document that lets us say, this is the result of the dairy task force. And I think that, not trying to put forward any hubris, but I would like to try to distill a lot of these ideas and things into that written document. I mean, we'll have all of our physical votes and recommendations and everything in that document somewhere, but I really would like to have a piece that's both readable and approachable by ordinary people, and something that we agree with. And I'm wondering if we could have maybe a small group of our subset of folks online that care about that react to some early drafts of that document, and it will all come back to us to look at and finally vote on before we release any of it. But
Mark,
that's something to be supportive of. Yeah.
Mark, you've already, this is Brad, you've already got kind of a structure somewhat in place with committee chairpersons. Would it make sense to use that structure as kind of that vetting to start with and then go from there?
I'd be
as a committee chair, I'm more than happy to be part of the helping get it distilled.
Be happy to do that. If there's anybody else that would like to join that group, I guess, in earlier drafts, by all means volunteer. I'm not trying to exclude anybody.
Yeah, and neither was I guess I should point that out. I wasn't trying to exclude, I was just making a point that you've kind of already got a structure there. So it would be easy to have a small group work on that part of it.
Paul, Mark, if we go down this route, count me into, about a chair.
Okay. Do I hear any more support for this? We could take this as a formal voter recommendation.
You need somebody to make a proposal, a formal motion?
Well, let's do this in a couple of stages. First of all, I would like to just take ask for a motion to accept the recommendations that we had according to the survey results. So if somebody would make that motion in a second, we can vote on that first, and then we can talk about this next step forward here, I think, which is the document.
Bart, this is Shelley Meyer. I so move that we, as a task force, take the recommendations as ranked by the group and move them forward.
Okay.
Dave,
Was that Dave? We had a couple people that jumped on there. As a
I was only one of them.
Okay.
Dave Buholzer.
Okay. We have a motion and a second then. All those in favor indicate by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
None opposed. We'll accept that motion then of the rankings according to the survey. I would then happily take a motion that we consider moving toward our final document here with drafts and early drafts and responses to those, perhaps as subcommittee chairman and anyone else who would like to be a part of that before it comes back to the entire group with a full document.
So moved. This is Brad.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second for Brody Staple.
Okay, we have a move and second. All those in favor of draft and proposals as moved, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Well, I don't know that we have a lot of additional work for the task force today. I think that as we start to get down toward this, at least initial drafts and then final draft of the document, all will be revealed. But we do want to think a little bit about implementation. That draft document would have some suggestions, I think, about who the implementing groups for the various recommendations will be as well, which is not an exclusive set, but there would be at least recommendations. And, then we can think a little bit about how do we begin to roll those out into actual implementation. I would remind us that that first task force did a little bit of a post-mortem on their structure a few years after the task force recommendations are brought out, and they asked themselves, how many of these were fully implemented? How many of them were partially implemented? How many of them really didn't get any traction at all? And if I remember correctly, and I probably don't, and I would be happy for Ashley to correct me, it was something like a third, a third, a third. So a third of them were fully implemented. And, you can recognize, I think, that there were a few themes that came out of that first one too, such as specialty cheese is something we ought to explore. So we've got a few themes too, and I hope that we can capture those well in this document. Are there any other things that should be brought up here at this meeting or be discussed here before we would conclude today?
Yeah, this is Jerry Schrader. I get asked by a lot of producers, what are we doing that's going to help them now, not 10 years down the road? Is there any way of working that into the report in some way of pointing out market changes or cost savings or things that can be implemented short term and things that have done more long term?
Oh boy, Jerry, you are asking that $64,000 question. I get that. I get that every day, so I should have a really good answer prepared. I wish I did.
Well, I think it starts with your publicity of the committee, that the committee was formed for the benefit of the industry, and we have to explore all parts and pieces of it. But Jerry's absolutely correct. There is some criticism around the state as far as the committee and the number of recommendations that were actually farmer specific. So Jerry's not wrong in his point.
One thing that I will take us back to in terms of asking us to remember at our very first meeting, I suggested that we should not probably spend a lot of time in this committee trying to correct our current problems, because in my opinion, market would correct that before anything the committee would do actually could. What we wanted to do, I think, was to create the best environment for the dairy industry going forward and consider ways in which we might keep ourselves from getting in this same situation, another time down the road. I know that's not satisfactory for people who are in real trouble and hurting today, but boy, give me any ideas that you have. Right now, I'd be more than happy to take them.
I got one, Mark, Ryan Kusendorf.
Yeah.
I know we talked a lot on things and been involved in putting some programs together with farmers and various other ag organizations. And one thing I hit on before is how do we get that value back to the producers with all these value-added products we're promoting out there? Is there a way to create a federal order to recover a portion of that value-added product that the processor, the marketer, and the retailer have skin in the game, just like the farmer does? It just seems like the farmer is receiving a lot of the downturn of the economy.
Yeah. And, I do think that we are seeing some of these being almost mechanically pushed back to the farm level when we had, back in the year 2000, some of the changes to our federal pricing system when we went from the MW to our current one. And that is that, before farm and retail prices used to kind of be connected like with a rubber band. There was some give and take in those, and now they're connected with a rod, so essentially a lot of that, virtually all of that price movement gets pushed back at the farm level. That's a mere reflection of the way we've chosen to price things. That wasn't an idea that people had that would be good or bad or otherwise. It was an outcome, I think, of some choices we made.
Yeah, this is Dave. Looking at that, and I've been around long enough to know and very well remember the MW and the change over to the federal orders. I think one of the issues is when back in Minnesota, Wisconsin pricing, that was all done on basically manufacturing milk in a time when. I remember when we had our first grade A farm here, and at that time most of the milk was grade B and going into manufacturing. As the grade B milk went away and became grade A, that's pretty much when everything went over to the federal orders, and that's how the MW got pretty much abolished because it was a non-issue, So the situation we're in now, and I definitely don't agree with how the federal orders are pricing is done. But like you say, that's something I'm not sure how you change that at this point.
Well, we may have federal order hearings coming up here over the next year or two, specifically to look at issues like make allowance and other things. So that may be a time to open a broader national discussion. But probably is not going to be done, Ryan, right now in time to help save dairy farms.
Right, I understand that, but then looking at it kind of as a whole, knowing that we will have those hearings coming up, we really only have one or two recommendations from the whole committee that we could hit on, and that was reducing, going to 2 classes of milk, and then the mandatory pooling. Do we need to address the more things in the committee to put out there for when those hearings do come up that we support?
Well, I would just suggest that maybe what we try to do at this point in time is to think about tying up the loose ends that we have with our current task force. And, federal order issues are going to be a big deal. I like the idea of the structure that we've got and that it cuts across a lot of industry segments here. And that would be great to pull together another group of people to talk about federal order issues in anticipation of a federal order hearing. I think the state will want to do something like that to have a presence there. But, I'm not sure that this is the right venue for it. That's my 2 cents. I'd be happy for other people to jump in on that.
Mark, as you look back, you mentioned the one third that happened with the previous task force, if you look back at those recommendations that were made, how many of them were directly at the producer level, and how big of impact did they have? I mean, the ones that were implemented. I mean, they maybe weren't read such that they are directly in producer impact today, but over the long haul, the producer impact was pretty big, I think. I guess that would be, something as we look at all of our recommendations that we're making, they maybe don't look like they're a specific direct producer impact right now, but in the long run, they could be very significant.
Yeah, it's hard to say, I guess, what our hindsight impact will have been, by the time some of these things happen. I think that, we've had some recommendations that probably are catching the curl of the wave here. In other words, some of these are maybe a little bit in process now, and we are lending support to them, that they could happen with or without the task force saying a thing about it. But there may be a few ideas that we've had that other people haven't expressed before. So I'm not really sure what total impact will be. But, the last time around, it wasn't just at the producer level, it was also at the processor level. I think that some of the recommendations they had at both of those individual businesses were pretty impactful when we look back.
So then maybe it becomes this, how can we make it more than just a recommendation as we move forward in the future? Because otherwise, it's something that we did out there. It's that future support that's really needed to keep pushing on some of these things. And, after the committee's done, it's basically like it stops. Our recommendation is there, but it needs more than that.
So this is Paul Sharfman, and I will respond. I think we have some information about how to move this forward. Brody, I think, is very helpful. It just has to be blunt. It's going to be up to on this phone call to make it happen. The people at Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, the people in the state legislature, the professors, really can't be asked to do that because that's lobbying. But we can make a difference in getting bills in front of the legislatures and getting them enthusiastic and showing them and talking. We can make these things happen. I very much endorse the direction by trying to get a one-page document to summarize what we've done and have us people in our industry organizations go stand in the corridor in the legislature, in the lobby. I think we can do this.
Yeah, I think we all have roles to play in this for sure. And there'll be opportunities, just maybe it's a matter of recognizing them as such and taking that opportunity to mention, one or two of these recommendations to the right people and moving that ball forward a few inches or yards.
Mark, this is John Lucy here. I guess kind of a different suggestion would be, we have a lot of recommendations now, but we actually, and these are kind of strategy kind of things, but we don't have an overall vision. What do we want the future Wisconsin dairy industry to look like? These are kind of how do you get there? You do this, you invest in this, you have this thing, but I think we're kind of lacking that. I don't know if that's what you meant by distilling down, but it seems like we need a level above this that goes and says, here's the vision for what we should have in Wisconsin, or want to have, or desire to have here in Wisconsin. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's kind of, we have a lot of recommendations to ask for this and do this and do this, but I think we're kind of lacking something at a level above this.
Well, I appreciate that, John, and I guess that was a big part of what I hope to do in the draft of this document that goes out there. That, again, I'd like to distill these recommendations into a few more consistent themes that really talk about what a healthy industry looks like and how do we get there. We started not by taking necessarily a really big picture view of the dairy world and, some utopia that we could accomplish, but rather by identifying some impediments that each of us saw from our different perspectives, and then trying to address some of those. But yeah, there is a bigger strategy view, and I hope that we pull that together in such a way that it seems useful and presentable.
Again, just to give you an example, do we want small farms? Do we want large farms? What kind of farming, dairy industry do we want? Do we want a vibrant rural community? What kind of research environment do we want supporting dairy? What kind of, are we going to be focused on exports? It seems like there are some themes that came out here, but there also seems like we need a little bit of a vision. These would put underneath that or something. I don't know, maybe you were going to try and do that, but it seems that's an important thing, because I think that's what policymakers like. They want to know what do you guys want to be in the next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with you, John. I think that we will try to pull some of that stuff together in this document, and maybe it'll be a collection of the discussions that we've had at these dozens of subcommittee meetings and others. We've had lots of discussions about what do we hope to see, but we've assembled all those different perspectives, and hopefully when we're done we can describe the elephant, but that's the big strategy, I suppose. Well, do we have any further discussion for today's meeting? I am mindful that it's a nice day, and I have seen tankers moving out into fields, so I'm sure a few of you are anxious to be there too.
We still have snow on the ground.
Snow on the ground, shame on you. Okay, I won't say any more about that then. We have precious no snow here, thank you. I would take a motion to adjourn the meeting if we are at that point.
So moved, Darren.
Darren moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. We thank you very much for your time on this meeting.